Okay, welcome back everyone. Jim Broomall here, and I've brought back my good friend Dana Shoaf, again editor of Civil War Times. And what's so perhaps interesting, Dana, is that here we are at a very quiet Weikert Lane, and if Pat were to pan to his right, we can see just an immense number of tourists.
The road is choked with people over there.
We're gearing up for a BART program in the area of Devil's Den, which of course highlights the continued popularity of the Civil War, but also certain parts of the battlefield are going to be a lot more heavily visited than others.
Right, this is an overlooked area. Before we go on, I'd like to thank the George Tyler Moore Center for the Study of the Civil War for having me on a couple times today. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. But like Jim was saying, we're on the John T. Weikert farm lane, more or less at the base of Little Round Top, and there's nobody here. But this area played an interesting role in the July 2nd fighting as well. And if you go just a few hundred yards over to the south, there's probably hundreds of people swarming over Little Round Top. So a lot of people don't come here, but there's some interesting stories on the John Weikert farm lane. And I'm going to go over briefly what happened here. There's no federal infantry presence in this area on July 2nd until very late in the day, about 7 o'clock in the evening, when Brigadier General Frank Wheaton's 6th Corps Brigade takes position on Munchauer Hill. You can't see that behind us because of the trees. Some people just call it the northern extension of Little Round Top.
That may 400 yards?
300 yards.
Yeah,
there's a nice ridge up there. And so about 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the evening, Wheaton's brigade, along with the Pennsylvania Reserves, charges down into this area. Now, of course, a jet's going to fly over. Let's let that clear out so, in case it's causing any noise pollution. I think we're okay now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so about 7 o'clock, the Pennsylvania Reserves that are more coming off Little Round Top proper and Wheaton's brigade behind me are going to charge through this area. They're going to drive back Brigadier General William Wofford's Georgia Brigade that had advanced from across the Emmitsburg Road down the Wheatfield Road, which is just to our south, into this area. And when they did, Wofford's men overran this battery to my left, Lieutenant Aaron Walcott's 3rd Massachusetts Battery. They had 6 guns here, about 116 men, managed to fire 1 round, and then they had to get out of here and spike their guns. They should have never been there. That's a 5th Corps battery that one of Daniel Sickles' staff officers from the 3rd Corps snagged and put in this bad location and made them very vulnerable to this attack. So this federal battery is overrun. Wofford's men are continuing up toward the slope when that counterattack occurs, and it's the last federal counterattack of July 2nd. So Wheaton's brigade and the Pennsylvania Reserves drive back Wofford's men and the remnants of Confederates coming out of the wheat field and secure this area for the Union Army very late in the day. So it's an important to remember. There's no infantry here. Even after the 20th Maine fighting has died down, it's still very vulnerable. There's some other interesting facets to this area as well. The farmhouse to my right was the location of the John T. Weikert farmhouse. John Weikert was in the Union Army, but he wasn't in the Army of the Potomac. He was in Baltimore with his regiment, the 138th Pennsylvania, when the Battle of Gettysburg is fought. His wife and children are here, but of course he knows what's happening, and he's directly, or I should say indirectly, impacted by the battle, because the 3rd Corps of the Army of the Potomac is so badly wrecked that Weikert's regiment is going to be placed in the Army of the Potomac in July 7th. Mm-hmm. And in the fall, Weikert's going to get wounded at the arm at the Battle of Mine Run. And his regiment's put in to replenish the troops. He spends the rest of the war convalescing, and his post-war years are not happy and prosperous. He's brought up on assault charges several times for assaulting his wife. In one case, he chased after her with a revolver. It's really not very pleasant.
And this highlights, if I may, I mean, just again, the continued legacies of these battles.
Right.
I mean, we really need to expand our narratives and think more holistically about how these fights are impacting men not only on the day, but in some cases for decades afterward, and more importantly, for their families.
Right. So tangentially, Weikert's farm is wrecked because of the battle. He's drawn into the Army of the Potomac because of Gettysburg, and he gets wounded in the arm in November, and the rest of his life is not great. And he eventually will have to sell the farm to a man named Francis Altoff, who will tear down Weikert's house, which is in bad shape, and build those structures.
Okay. So these are post-battle.
Those are post-war structures. Okay. And Altoff will sell the farm to the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. Okay. So that's, just another little sidelight of the area down here. Now, the monuments down here also tell an interesting story. These are the monuments to Wheaton's brigade of the 6th Corps that fought in this area. We're going to take a look in particular at the 93rd Pennsylvania monument here. It's a very nice monument, and when you come here, you might notice this rock that it sits on. And it just says July 2nd and 3rd, 1863. Well, the 93rd Pennsylvania had 2 monuments. This is the photograph of the dedication of their first monument in October of 1884. This is the monument right here.
And it's an unusual monument, is that correct, Dana?
It's unusual, yeah. It's very idiosyncratic, and these are veterans of the regiment gathered here. You notice the American flag, and there's a band. This is Little Round Top in the background. So they're here for the monument dedication, and that monument actually sat on that rock. But later in the 1880s, the state of Pennsylvania awarded regiments that had fought here $1,500 to put a monument on the battlefield. Even if you had one here, you could still get that money.
Okay.
But you had to meet certain requirements, one of which was you had to put the bronze state seal on the monument.
Okay.
And it had to be out of sort of a uniform tone of granite, like this lighter granite. So those veterans took the money, and if you want to hold this,
Sure,
Jim,
of course.
and they put up this second monument in this location. The first monument still stands on the battlefield. It's at the top of Munshauer Hill. It's a pink Pennsylvania granite with a very unique blue cross on it.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's a mosaic almost.
It's a mosaic.
Okay.
It's a tile mosaic. It's really handsome, actually.
Yeah, it
handsome
is.
monument.
Striking.
Yeah. And so when they wanted to put the bigger monument on here, they had to shear off the top of this rock to accommodate it. Now, if you come over here with the camera, you can see some marks from the masons' tools where they drilled in and used wedges to split the rock off. And interestingly enough, the debris from that monument is still here. Can you see the carving on there?
3rd Brigade, is that
3rd
right?
Brigade, yeah, it was 3rd Brigade, 3rd Division of the 6th Corps. So these boulders that are laying around, and there's a couple on the other side, are actually remnants from this boulder when it was sheared down to accommodate this bigger monument.
Right.
And one last little footnote before I leave you. The colonel of the 93rd Pennsylvania was named James McCarter, but he was not in command of the regiment during the battle himself. He had problems with alcohol for whatever reason. He was wounded earlier in the war. It may have been because of that. But Major John Nevin is actually in command of the regiment here, okay? But what's interesting is this is the 93rd's regimental history. It's called Red, White, and Blue Badge. It was published in 1911.
Okay.
This is an original copy of it. And Nevin hardly gets mentioned in here. And one of the reasons for that, I speculate, is because Nevin is from western Pennsylvania.
Okay.
The regiment is from eastern
Okay.
Pennsylvania.
So some tension there, perhaps.
Yeah. And so, you know, Nevin is sort of an outsider among these guys. And he's dead by the time this is written and this monument is put up.
So he's almost written out of the history.
He's kind of written out of the history.
Okay.
Right. They don't really mention him much. You know, he's sort of an afterthought, which is kind of a shame, because he'll lead the regiment even through the battles of the wilderness. But
Right.
he's sort of, you know, not very prominent in his regimental.
Now, if I can ask, how did you actually start to kind of unpack that story? Because it sounds like in the post-war memory,
Yeah.
he's almost written out of the record,
Right.
but yet you've kind of reclaimed or
Well,
recovered his memory.
Years and years ago, I was at the John Hines Regional History Center in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And I was waiting for a friend to get off work, and I was just looking through their catalog and saw that they had a diary by John Nevin, and it contained Gettysburg content.
Okay.
So I got a look at the diary, and I later transcribed portions of it, and I've published it here and there in various publications. And he's leading the regiment. It's very clear. He keeps a very copious diary. He talks about the 6th Corps' sort of epic 30-mile march from Manchester on the evening of July 1st into July 2nd. And they're the lead brigade of the 6th Corps when that march arrives here on the battlefield.
Oh, okay.
And they're literally, John Sedgwick directs them immediately from the Baltimore Pike into the fight. This is the only 6th Corps brigade that's going to be heavily engaged at Gettysburg. Wheaton's brigade.
Sure.
Yeah. And that consisted of the 139th Pennsylvania, the 93rd Pennsylvania, the 62nd New York, and then you can't see the monument, but the 98th Pennsylvania is down around the corner. And the 102nd Pennsylvania, their monument is not in line with the others because they were actually guarding ammunition trains in Westminster.
Okay.
And so they arrived very late, but they wanted their monument here, so they set them ahead a little bit to indicate that they're not part of the, you know, the actual battle line
Sure.
here. Yeah.
Okay.
But that's generally, you know, just a small bit of the, you know, history you could find here on the John Weikert farm lane. So I guess my you know, there's a couple points here. You know how like a drop in the a pebble drops in a puddle and
right, ripples out.
The battle keeps rippling out in memory. How these guys want their service remembered. What happens to John Weikert, and also when you come to Gettysburg, sometimes you know get off the beaten path a little bit, and you know Little Round Top is obviously fascinating for many reasons, but if you start reading about it and come to places that are much more quiet, you'll find out there's still a lot of fascinating history here.
Yeah, and we deeply appreciate that, Dana, and we deeply appreciate your participation today. So
I appreciate you having me.
Formally thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So special
absolutely.
thanks to Dana Shoaf and Civil War Times for being part of our program. We're going to be heading over to the Trossel Farm in a couple minutes here at time, and we're going to thank Dana once more for his time today. So
thanks everybody for watching. I appreciate it.
Thank you.